Terri is a PhD candidate in ethnomusicology at the University of Florida with plans to graduate this December. Her areas of interest include African American music, specifically related to vocal practices, spanning from the Negro spiritual to contemporary R&B. Her current research focuses on how the vocal sound on recorded sermons from the 1920s by African American ministers intersects with racial uplift theories from the same era. Her dissertation is tentatively entitled African American Vocal Expressions on Recorded Sermons by Reverend A.W. Nix, The Voice as Index for Intercultural Diversity and Racial Uplift in the 1920s. And that sounds like a couple pages in itself. Anyway, here's Terri.
Thank you. The purpose of my presentation today is to discuss the life of Reverend Andrew A.W. Nix, his brother William W.M. Nix, and their influence on gospel music composer Thomas A. Dorsey. Reverend A.W. Nix recorded 54 sermons on the Vocalion label between 1927 and 1931 and lived in Chicago in the 1920s. His brother William was a gospel singer and is often confused with A.W. Nix. Thomas A. Dorsey also recorded on the Vocalion label and is considered the father of gospel music. I was privileged with the travel grant from ARSC for this research, so I'd like to express my thanks to ARSC. I traveled to Philadelphia in May of 2017, where I met with Andrew Nix's two surviving children, Janester, now 90 years old, and Elwood, 88. They provided me with family photos and told me their personal histories growing up with this powerful Baptist minister as a father. I'd like to begin with a brief family history of Andrew and William Nix before discussing their individual contributions to Dorsey's gospel compositions. Reverend Andrew William A.W. Nix was born on November 30th, 1880 in Harmony Hill, Texas in Rusk County, later moving with his family to Longview, Texas in Gregg County. His father, William, was a farmer and preacher and married his wife, Ida Peterson, in Rusk County in 1876. William and Ida had 3 children together, William Jr., Andrew, and Emma. And that is William Sr. on the front row, his wife, Ida, on the front row on the right, W.M. Nix, the tall person in the back row on the left, Emma in the middle, and A.W. Nix on the right. A.W. Nix was converted and baptized in Longview, Texas at the age of 12. Where both he and his siblings sang in the church choir. There are no details of his life as a youth, but we can assume that he most likely worked on his parents' farm. It is also likely that the Nix family endured hardships as a result of the boll weevil infestation that overtook parts of Mexico and Texas in the late 19th and early 20th century, which may have inspired A.W. to invest his talents in opportunities other than farming. In 1906, at 26 years old, Andrew was licensed as a minister in Topeka, Kansas. He was ordained in 1908 at the age of 28 and began his studies at Western Baptist College in Macon, Missouri. For unknown reasons, Andrew transferred to State University in Louisville, Kentucky in 1909. After graduating in 1915, Reverend Nix began his career as a college-educated minister. He is, in a sense, a contradiction to the stereotypical uneducated Southern migrant in that he was college-educated with 2 degrees, a normal school degree in 1913 and a Bachelor of Divinity in 1915. His life goal, as described by his daughter Janester, was to move from church to church and build up the church membership while simultaneously improving the physical structures of the churches themselves and reducing their debts. Between 1914 and 1940, the Nix family moved between Georgetown, Kentucky, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, New York and Harlem, Maywood, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, Cleveland, Ohio, Pittsburgh again, and finally settling in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1920, he accepted a position of pastor at Mount Moriah Baptist Church in New York City and Harlem, where he met his future wife, Ida Bircher, an immigrant from Bermuda, 21 years his junior. Nix served as pastor of Mount Moriah until 1923, while simultaneously serving as a policeman in New York City. Andrew's brother, William W.M., was also a singer and minister. Between 1915 and 1919, he lived in Chicago and traveled to different cities to sing or deliver sermons. The confusion between brothers Andrew A.W. Nix and William W.M. Nix has been ubiquitous in the scholarship, with practically every mention of each brother clouded in erroneous information. Scholars have often misidentified which brothers sang at the 1921 National Baptist Convention, ultimately influencing gospel composer Thomas A. Dorsey and leading to his initial conversion and his first gospel compositions. Some have even confused William and Andrew as being the same person. Even Thomas Dorsey confused the two brothers and who sang at the convention, remembering that it was either, quote, A.W. Nix, or if it wasn't him, it was his brother. There was two Nix. One was a great singer, and then one was a preacher. We now know that the great singer was William Nix, and the preacher was Andrew Nix. Both Andrew and William Nix Jr. attended the National Baptist Convention in Chicago in September 1921. William sang at the convention, where he quote-unquote thrilled both the convention attendees and future gospel composer Thomas A. Dorsey, who was also at the 1921 convention. William sang I Do, Don't You as a promotion for the newly published hymn book Gospel Pearls. One key source of the confusion between the two Nix brothers and which of them actually influenced Dorsey at the 1921 convention lies in Michael W. Harris's book, The Rise of Gospel Blues, the music of Thomas Andrew Dorsey in the urban church. Harris correctly credits William Nix as being the singer that inspired Dorsey to write gospel music. However, Harris states that it was, quote, the sudden notoriety of the sermon records of the Reverend W.M. Nix, listed as A.W. Nix on recordings, the singing evangelist who inspired Dorsey at the 1921 National Baptist Convention, end quote, which led Dorsey to seek like-voice singers and represent his songs after his second conversion. So Dorsey had two conversions. The first one, after he heard William sing at the convention, led him to start writing his first gospel compositions, but then he was lured by the money of the blues and went back to playing blues. It was later in life when he had a second conversion, and that is when he started looking for a singer who could represent his songs and market them, and that's ultimately what led to his larger success. Harris proceeds with an in-depth analysis of Andrew Nix's recorded sermons, confusing the two brothers as being the same person, believing that the recordings were actually by William Nix rather than Andrew Nix. Another key source that has led to years of misrepresentation is in Paul Oliver's Songsters and Saints, Vocal Traditions on Race Records. Oliver claims that A.W. was from Birmingham, Alabama, was a miner and a piano player, and who sang I Do, Don't You at the 1921 convention, recorded in New York, and was a man, quote, with considerable wisdom if little formal education, when in fact, Andrew was a minister from Texas who did not play piano, recorded in Chicago, and had a college education with 2 degrees. These two main sources have led to numerous other sources providing incorrect information. While Harris's and Oliver's book are hugely valuable to the scholarship, and I am not dissing them, I'm just trying to set the record straight. So William Nix was born only 1.5 years earlier than Andrew and was also a preacher and singer. Hence the confusion between the two is understandable. Even Andrew's daughter, Janester, claims that it was her father who inspired Dorsey due to Andrew's constant singing of I Do, Don't You around the house. In a personal interview, Janester emphasized to me the distinction between the two brothers by describing her father, Andrew, as a preacher who sang, while her uncle William was a singer who preached. It matters who influenced Dorsey at the convention for the simple reason of setting the record straight for future researchers by distinguishing between the two brothers and giving proper credit to where it is due. Archival research and analysis of the two brothers' vocal styles corrects these misconceptions, and I don't have time to go into the vocal styles, but it's interesting. While William's voice contributed to Dorsey's first conversion and initial gospel compositions, Andrew's voice may have stood as the exemplar of African American vocal traditions after Dorsey's second conversion and subsequent success as the progenitor of the new gospel blues composition style. The traditional down-home qualities of the voice of A.W. Nix, as heard on his sermons, demonstrate the sonic qualities of the Southern black minister singer which Dorsey sought to represent his songs.
And now the devil sent his Christ to the engine there and tell him to pull his throttle wide open and hit damnation switch in a black shade of midnight and make a fast run for hell. Oh, gambler, get on the black diamond train. Oh, midnight rambler, get on the black diamond train. Oh, backslider, get on the black diamond train. Children, aren't you glad you got on the black diamond train a long time ago? And now the devil sent his Christ to the engine there and tell him to pull his throttle wide open and hit damnation switch in a black shade of midnight and make a fast run for hell. Oh, gambler, get on the black...
Actually started again. Despite the confusion between the two brothers, the minutes of the 1921 National Baptist Convention clearly distinguished between Andrew and William, their titles, and the roles they served at the convention. William was addressed as Professor Nix, or as a national evangelistic singer, while Andrew Nix was titled as Reverend A.W. Nix. And this is the actual minutes that I retrieved in New York at the Columbia Theological Center. And you can see on the left side, on the middle column there, Reverend Andrew Nix in Chicago, and then from New York is Mount Moriah, Reverend A.W. Nix. So they're clearly distinguished as being different people. While Andrew served on several boards of the convention, William conducted devotionals and sang. William and Andrew are clearly distinguished in the minutes as holding separate duties and responsibilities. Although it was not Andrew Nix who initially influenced Dorsey, but instead his brother William, Andrew may have influenced Dorsey later in life, and I will return to Dorsey later. Andrew Nix and his wife moved to Chicago in 1923, and it is there that they had 4 of their 5 children. While in the Chicago area, Nix pastored at 2 churches, Second Baptist in Maywood and Mount Olive Baptist in Chicago. The Great Migration that began during World War I brought thousands of black families to northern metropolis cities such as New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia to seek employment opportunities and escape racism in the South. The Nix family was no exception. Whether Nix moved his family to Chicago to better their opportunities or to accept a position as pastor is not known. The Nix family lived on Ogden Avenue in the 18th Ward, sharing a house with another family of 8, approximately 5 miles from Bronzeville, an important hub in the Black Arts movement in the south side of Chicago. The main thoroughfare of Bronzeville was called the Stroll, which passed down State Street. Bronzeville, as an all-black community contained within a racial boundary, was a small universe within itself, consisting of diverse class structures of acceptables and shadies. With the lower class in the majority, it became known as a center of prostitution, gambling, and illegal hustling. Although Andrew and his wife Ida were both conservative in their values, demonizing alcohol consumption, jazz, and the blues, the lively atmosphere of Bronzeville must have been in their peripheral vision. The activities on the Stroll, besides saucy girls and bootlegging, included jazz and theater with over 1,000 professional entertainers, more than those similar venues in the combined states of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, where the blues and jazz were said to have originated. Thomas E. Dorsey played piano at the clubs on State Street at the same time Ida and his wife were avoiding them. Notable jazz and blues artists such as King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, Bessie Smith, and Louis Armstrong, as well as record companies who advertised in the Chicago Defender, set up shop in Chicago. Some background information on Dorsey is necessary so that we understand who he was and his contributions to the field of gospel music. And you probably all know this, but I'll say it anyway. Thomas E. Dorsey originally was a blues pianist who went by the name of Georgia Tom and Barrel House Tom, and recorded songs with a guitarist by the name of Tampa Red. The duo of Georgia Tom and Tampa Red had several big hits in the 1920s, with their hokum blues, which were blues songs with sexually suggestive themes. One song, It's Tight Like That, was such a huge hit that several versions of the song were recorded. The iconography in the advertisement suggests the connection between loose women and the blues. The song catapulted Dorsey to fame and fortune, bringing his name into the national spotlight. Dorsey, as Georgia Tom, made a living playing in Chicago, eventually performing and recording with some of the greats in the blues, such as Ma Rainey. Blues recordings were very popular in the 1920s, released on what were officially called race records. Race records included blues, jazz, sermons, comedy, spoken word, for example. Although the name race records is derogatory today, in the 1920s, race records were a source of pride for African Americans because the records allowed for music and spoken word to be recorded and distributed specifically to Black consumers. Between 1927 and 1931, while in Chicago, Reverend A.W. Nix recorded 54 sermons for the Vocalion label. Recordings would allow for opportunities of mass exposure to the public via the medium of the new phonograph recordings and their accompanying advertisements, and the potential for additional income. Simultaneously, Dorsey was seeking a voice to market his new gospel blues that could wail, moan, and cry, vocal characteristics associated with not only the blues of the 1920s, but also with the folk spiritual, the chanted sermon, and with folk preachers. Dorsey may have incorporated blues-type harmonies into his gospel blues, but what he really sought was a voice to market his compositions that carried the traditions associated with the folk spiritual and the folk preacher, such as the voice and chanted sermons of A.W. Nix. Although I've not been able to confirm 100% that Dorsey heard Andrew's voice on his recorded sermons or in church services, it is likely that their paths did cross. Nix's son Elwood claims that, quote, whenever Thomas Dorsey would go to hear him preach, his father, he would, end quote. Elwood also remembers, quote, Tommy Dorsey said to my dad one time, "You're almost as famous as I am." And my father responded to Dorsey with, "I'm striving to get there." Daughter Janester Nix also remembers that, quote, his name, Dorsey's, had been spoken so much in the house, and that Nix and Dorsey were friends. Other reasons also point to the possibility that Nix and Dorsey knew one another. Both Dorsey and Andrew lived in Chicago at the same time. Andrew from 1923 to 31, Dorsey from 1916 until his death in 1993. Nix lived only 5 miles from State Street, where Dorsey often performed. Dorsey traveled from church to church, presumably Baptist churches, because he was Baptist and Nix was Baptist, and possibly ventured into Andrew's church and heard him preach. Andrew was the only Black Baptist minister in Chicago making recordings at the time whose recordings were largely successful, thus again suggesting that Dorsey may have heard A.W.'s recordings. And most importantly, both Dorsey and Nix recorded on the Vocalion Brunswick label in the Chicago Brunswick studios on November 1st, 1930. Because their sessions were back-to-back, they probably encountered each other in the studio. In addition, Andrew recorded 3 sermons that were titled almost identically to Dorsey's songs, all released on Vocalion. Nix's The Dirty Dozen Part 2, based on Dorsey's The Dirty Dozen Number 2, both recorded in June 1930. Nix's Jack the Ripper and Tampa Red and Georgia Tom's Jack the Ripper Blues, both 1931. And Nix's It Was Tight Like That, 1930, based on Dorsey's very successful hokum blues composition, It's Tight Like That, 1928. The lyrics to Dorsey's version, although tame by today's standards, were voyeuristic for their day. Although Andrew demonized blues and jazz for their connections to the world, meaning the world of sin, he still recorded his sermon version of It's Tight Like That in 1930, with a text that reflected on the hardships caused by the Great Depression, not sexual themes, of course. Could it be that he was inspired to record a sermon by the same title as Dorsey's Hokum Blues because of a possible friendship with Dorsey? Why else would Nix cross his own demarcation zone and associate with a well-known blues song with sexual implications? Lastly, Thomas Dorsey, as Georgia Tom, accompanied blues singer Victoria Spivey on several of her recordings. Spivey also recorded on Vocalion and had a leading role in the film Hallelujah that was released in 1929 that also featured Reverend Nix's sermon, Black Diamond Express to Hell. Therefore, it is possible that Dorsey, Spivey, and Nix were familiar with each other in the least. And here's a photo of Spivey's promo for the film Hallelujah that came out at that time. So in conclusion, regardless if Dorsey and Andrew Nix were friends, acquaintances, or simply knew of each other is a moot point. What is more important is Dorsey's search for a voice that offered vocal traditions familiar to Black churchgoers. What Dorsey was seeking in the right singer was not a unique singer such as Brother William, but a traditionalist in the style of Andrew, whose voice had the qualities that Dorsey deemed appropriate for his gospel blues, a voice type that was familiar to the people, one that imbued tradition. I contend that Andrew A.W. Nix was that voice. Thank you.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes time for questions. Hold it, Dick. Hold it, Dick. No, Dick Spotswood.
Okay. I'll stand anyway. I think one or two important points. The Black Diamond Express to Hell being based on an older folk metaphor that goes back, I know, at least to the, ultimately to the Pilgrim's Progress, I think, in the 17th century, but certainly to was it Nathaniel Hawthorne's comparison of the Pilgrim's Progress to riding on a train, a comfortable train to heaven and everything. And that metaphor was often turned on its head, as it were, before A.W. Nix. But I think that was a very popular expression of a theme that was already very familiar to his audiences. Mm-hmm. Point two, Nix was making phonograph records of spoken word sermons at a time when you could hear white sermons on radio, but black sermons had no comparable outlet. And the Reverend J.M. Gates was the very crucial stylistically, Nix on these records is a clone of Reverend Gates. Instead of an educated D.D. Northern polite, well-spoken minister, he is the down and out, foot stomping, Bible pounding version of J.M. Gates in the South. And but the Black Diamond Express to Hell sold at least as well and probably outsold any of Gates' records, as important as they were. Just a few points.
Yes, thank you. I'm aware of Gates, and I actually want to do more research on recorded sermons and kind of analyze the different voices.
Yeah, that's the voice of another ARSC legend, and the reason you come to ARSC conferences, you get to hang with Dick Spotswood. John Tifteller's over here with a question.
Well, it's not exactly a question, it's just a correction. According to people who knew her, the correct pronunciation of the name is Victoria Spivey.
Spivey?
Correct.
Okay, very good, thank you.
She said it both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, she liked it either way.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Steve?
Yeah.
Terri, thank you very much for your fascinating presentation. Do you know how the size of Nix's recorded corpus compares with Gates and other contemporaries, and later recorded sermon ministers such as Reverend C.L. Franklin?
I don't know how many C.L. Franklin did, but of course he did a lot. I know that Gates had about 200. He actually was the most successful recorded preacher, but I believe that Nix, his voice is so dynamic. He had 54 sermons, and his recording career basically ended in 1931 with the Great Depression. So who knows if he could have had a longer career. I'm going to do more analysis of Gates to see when he actually finished. But I kind of think that Nix has a more powerful voice than Gates, because Gates had a little higher timbre.
He's still a folk preacher.
Oh, definitely. So
He's not an educated preacher on these records.
yeah. So it's really interesting.
Thank you. Just for the record, that was a discussion with John Tallahassee, remove the Talla, and Terri Brinegar. Any other questions? We're ready for lunch. So as far as I know.